When you dare to share, you break the silence. When you dare to share, you speak your truth. When you dare to share, you use the full strength of your voice. When you dare to share, it brings opportunity to own your story. So tell it, be heard, and at the same time, your sharing is someone else's learning, inspiration, motivation, empowerment, and hope. There's always an element to each of our stories that remains a secret. For some, we feel it's a dirty little secret. Dare to share your untold story exposes these secrets in a welcoming and positive way. I encourage each of you out there to dare yourself to share what is yours to tell. When we dare, it is the courage to do something really important. Let this be a vow to each and every single one of us that we take risk, we brave, confront, and face what is, while inspiring and empowering all communities. So let's break that silence and tap into mental beauty. This is Salima Jadabji, your podcast host, a practicing social worker, and your mental wellness connoisseur. Welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast, episode number 80. From multiple mental health diagnoses to a flourished mental health advocate. To all my fellow listeners, before we get started, I'm just dropping in a note to give you a heads up that this podcast might be emotionally triggering for you. We do invite guests onto the show who share openly about extremely difficult life moments with exposure and impact of what the struggles have been like. The intensity of each episode could have a variable impact on your emotional and mental well-being based on your own personal story. If at any point the topic becomes uncomfortable or upsetting to you in any way, please do not pressure yourself to listen. Instead, be kind to yourself, do some self-care, and perhaps give another episode a try. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing our courageous and daring guest, Allie Towns. Allie is a mental health advocate who embraces the ups and downs of her own journey with borderline personality disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, and depression. She uses her diagnoses to relate to others around the world through skits and deeply vulnerable discussions on social media. Upon facing trials with a cocktail of mental illnesses from a young age, she found a profound fascination with recovery and the human condition. Through years of treatment with cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, and head-first mindset into healing, her understanding of the experience grew and her perspective on human nature shifted. With this new wisdom, she pursues a career in the field of mental health care. Allie is a student at Mount Royal University, majoring in child and youth care counselor, with the goal of being the person she needed most when she was young and struggling. She has done practical work as a youth developmental counselor at a high school, a child behavioral counselor in a before and after school care program, and has created a summer camp for youth transitioning into adulthood while maintaining emotional wellness. When she is finished full-time schooling, she hopes to grow a counseling business of her own while helping out with residential youth mental health care facilities. Well, hello, Allie. Welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
It is such a pleasure to have you on the show, Allie. I am super pumped for this opportunity to have you on as a guest in the show today. I've got to say that I'm really grateful for your willingness to want to be here to tell your story. So thank you.
Absolutely, it's my honor.
Wonderful. And for me, Allie, it continues to be a blessing truly to have guests like yourself really give me permission to tap into their vulnerabilities and draw from your strength and insight and inspiration and then have it be shared in this space. It is very meaningful. And it is so important that we take a stance together to help break barriers of mental stigma.
I agree.
Great. I'm so glad that you're on board. And in case you're still wondering, Allie, this podcast is all about bringing forward untold stories that people go through, whether directly about a mental health struggle or something else. And we know that no matter what the story, there is impact on one's own mental health in some way, which remains tucked away. So the intention of this platform serves in a way to break the barriers of mental stigma that have been conditioned in our society. So my intention for us today, together, the hopeful mission, is for both of us to encourage people to share and tell what individuals typically have reservation to express. And of course, this means that I continue to bring forward a trend, and it's called the mental beauty rethink. All right, Allie, tell me, what are the first things that pop into your mind when you hear the phrase the mental beauty rethink?
Well, when I first think about it, I remember kind of an analogy that my mom gave me. She said some people are like orchids in the way that they need a very specific environment to thrive, whereas some other people are like dandelions in the way that they can grow through the cracks of a sidewalk. They can go through any kind of adversity and still be able to thrive. So that's one of the things I think about. But I also think about a conversation I've had with a colleague about how some mental illnesses, they have sort of superpower-esque parts of them. So ADHD, you can be multitasking, fast brain, BPD, like where would art be without highly sensitive people? And anxiety, your brain is hardwired to protect you. It's doing exactly what it needs to do, right?
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate your thought process and tying it all together. And this analogy with the orchids and the dandelions, I can just see, like, you were talking about it, and I could just visualize. I had an orchid that did not survive, did not thrive very well in my home. And we were sad about it.
It's ironic. I love orchids so much, but I cannot.
I love them too, but I am like a plant murderer or something. I'm not sure. And then I was just thinking about dandelions, and I could just visualize them like, rapidly growing like in every angle.
Oh, yeah.
And I love the analogy. Thank you. It actually paints such a clear picture.
Of course.
The thought process is pretty cool. Thank you. Okay. So Allie, I hear you have a story to tell. I can't wait to unravel it with you today. Shall we proceed?
Let's do it.
Amazing. I can hear you're pumped. I just got that sense. Almost like the Nike slogan, right? Just do it. I heard it. That. Yeah. All right. So that very first question that I ask, Allie, give us the newspaper headline of how you would title your untold story. What would it say?
So I thought about it, and I would say it's Chain Reaction, How My Unspoken Needs Harmed Innocence Around Me.
Okay, say that for me one more time.
Chain Reaction, How My Unspoken Needs Harmed Innocence Around Me.
Chain Reaction, How My Unspoken Needs Harmed Innocence Around Me. Okay, so now that's very thought-provoking. So you know what that means. I want to know more about this title. Can you say a little bit more about this title?
For sure. I was at an age where I couldn't really articulate my needs. I had needs that I wasn't fully aware of, and I wasn't the most self-aware teenager. And unfortunately, because I didn't know these needs, it kind of caused a domino effect, and it hurt the people that loved me because I wasn't communicating it very well.
Well, and that's the thing about being a teen, right? Like, there's so much that you're trying to learn and understand and make sense of. And communication doesn't always come easy. There's a lot of soft skills that teenagers are expected to know and do, but they haven't always been given the opportunity to learn and be exposed to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm inching. I know that your headline is very related to your story. So let's segue in. Let's learn about what your untold story is all about. Give us that snapshot.
For sure. So I had been self-harming. I was cutting for almost a year before this incident. And it was about time that my parents found out. Adults in my life were seeing it. And I had a boyfriend at the time who I kind of learned that I could get attention from if I cried wolf and I said, hey, I'm going to cut myself, and in kind of in a manipulative way. But one night I was sitting I had just had an argument with this boyfriend over text. And I came downstairs. It was probably like 9 p.m. The room was kind of yellow light, that calm, like evening vibe. And I was sitting in the living room watching 21 Jump Street. And the phone starts ringing. And somehow I just immediately knew what was about to happen.
Really?
Yeah, just this wave came over me, like my heart dropped. I don't know how I knew, like maybe it was the time of day that it was happening, like the timing of the argument, or just something like that. But of course my dad walks up to the phone and he answers it, and I can, like, just tension in the room. Like I immediately felt awful because I knew that my parents were about to find out about something that would hurt them. Like, no one wants to hear that their youngest daughter is cutting themselves, right? So, yeah, so my dad was on the phone. He said, yes, this is her dad. Oh, okay. No, I didn't know about this. It was like a 10-minute conversation. And then he hangs up and it's silence while he's trying to gather himself. And I could tell that he was thinking of what to say to me.
Right.
And I was thinking about what the heck I was going to say because I wasn't ready for this conversation. But yeah, he sits down and it's almost like we're whispering to each other. Like, it felt like such a quiet conversation. Yeah, I wasn't prepared because I knew he was going to ask me why I was cutting, but I myself didn't really know. Like, I didn't even understand it myself. And so trying to explain it to my dad, and at one point I was, man, this makes me really emotional. He said, do you feel loved? And I said, no, I don't. And I just saw the look on his face, like he sunk. And to this day, like, I still think about it and I feel awful. Like, because he's just the most loving man on earth, like so kind. And I looked this man in the eyes and said, no, I don't feel loved. It was just like, oh gosh, like.
Well, let me ask you something. When you were asked that question and you gave your answer, were you saying it to hurt him, or was that truly how you felt?
It was truly how I felt, and I think there was a part of me that was trying to grasp at any straw to justify this behavior that at this point would probably seem so strange to someone who's never heard of it before. So he said, do you feel loved? And I'm like, well, no, like what's the, it would make it seem even more bizarre if I said I did feel loved. I had no clue how to articulate my needs at the time.
Yeah, it's a real tough one. And I know that self-injurious behavior, like cutting, it does get misunderstood often. And I know that many times parents are afraid to bring it up because they feel like if we bring it up, then that will encourage my child to do more of it. Or isn't it better if we don't talk about it? So I've spoken with parents off and on about this topic over the years. And it is definitely a touchy subject. But one thing that I think gets missed a lot, not always, but it definitely gets missed a lot. And maybe you can give us your perspective as well. But when a person is engaging in anything that's self-injury, like, it's a way to release pent-up emotion and emotional pain. And it's not necessarily meaning that you want to end your life or that you want to die. Can you relate to that?
Absolutely. Yeah, when I started self-harming, I didn't really know exactly what I was doing.
Yeah.
It's not like I was super open about it with everyone. Like, I kind of sat in my room and I wore the long sleeves and everything. And I later realized that it provided a sense of control when I didn't feel like I had any when it came to my mental health or my environment. It was just kind of a way to ground myself. And it, of course, wasn't the healthiest way to do that. And I didn't realize that until after I like stopped self-harming. It was like, oh my gosh, that's what I was missing. Like just that sense of control.
Right. And I'm assuming that you didn't really know how to explain this entire process to your parents either.
No clue.
Right. And so what did support look like after that? I mean, it sounds like you had some really uncomfortable conversation with your father, but what happened after that? How did things go about?
We've had so many uncomfortable conversations. At the time, my parents were kind of walking through hell already with my siblings. They were struggling with their mental health as well. And so I think there was kind of a level of burnout that they were going through. And then suddenly their youngest daughter is self-harming. And it's like, oh my gosh, like they were frustrated with me. It was their approach to my self-harming was very medical. I remember my mom coming into my room and saying, "You're not depressed. Like, stop cutting yourself." And if they caught me self-harming, it was very like abrupt, like stern, get up, clean yourself off, don't do that again. And obviously that caused some strain.
Well, there was no empathy. They weren't able to show any compassion or empathy or connect with you.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I'm curious with some things that you mentioned a moment ago. You mentioned how you're the youngest of your siblings and they already had a lot to deal with and your parents were kind of burnt out. So were you feeling that you had to show up to be a certain kind of child in order to save the day or to feel like, oh, I have to make something of myself or I can't show up this way because, my siblings are already showing up this way? Like, was there some kind of pressure that you were putting on yourself in your like early teens, like during this period?
Sort of. Yeah, a bit. Like, I definitely had this instinct to downplay how much I was struggling. Yeah, like I remember my mom walking in on me cutting and she seemed really upset with me and I just remember being like I was so upset. I was like, "Man, I didn't mean for that to happen." Like I had my door closed for a reason. Like I really wanted to put on this kind of facade that therapy was working and just to give them a break from what was going on in the house. But they, how parents are, they could see that something was going on before the incident even happened.
Right. And did you ever let your parents know that their approach just wasn't working for you? Or did you feel that you just had to surrender to it because you didn't want to be more of a burden? Because you mentioned them feeling burnt out.
Yeah, I don't think I ever directly told them, "Hey, this isn't working," because I myself didn't even know how I would handle it in the same situation. Like,
Right.
I kind of went with the flow. I think that they would realize on their own that their approach wasn't working if my self-harm was getting more serious or if I was becoming a little bit more isolated from them.
So then when you say that, you were trying to give your parents the impression that you were doing better than you were and that treatments were working, what was really going on for you? So what was it actually like?
I loved going to therapy because it was amazing to have an adult on my side. Like it felt like I didn't have one. And so I go to therapy and I'm like sitting under this blanket with my hands around a hot chocolate and like I'm talking to an adult who can tell me that what I'm feeling is valid. I did love going to therapy, but was it helping me stop self-harming? Probably not, because if I'm going to maintain this relationship I have with this adult in my life, I can't get better too quickly. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Okay. So that's
yeah,
the story you were telling yourself in your mind. Like That was the narrative you had in the background. I can't get better too quickly, otherwise I won't have the support.
Yeah, I think it was more subconscious.
Mm-hmm.
But I do remember kind of a grieving period when my first DBT therapist got pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
She was like, well, like, you're going to have to fire me. And we were kind of laughing. But that whole next week, I felt terrible. I felt like I was losing my friend.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
At what point did that narrative, whether it was subconscious or not, at what point was there a shift where you were actually actively noticing something more?
It was when I started to build that self awareness and the understanding of my needs. So it's actually a few years after that therapist and I broke up.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh shoot, like I actually really needed that adult that can sit across from me and say, like, this is fair. It's fair that you're feeling this way. It's fair that this is how you've been operating. And
Mm-hmm.
I felt like I had lost that person. So yeah, it was years later, I kind of sat with myself and I was like, oh, it was one of those aha moments.
Yes, those aha light bulb moments.
Yeah.
Okay. And so when you started to build awareness, what was different for you?
It was a peak in my recovery.
Mm-hmm.
We all know that recovery isn't fully linear, but the more self-aware I've become over the years, the closer I feel with that person that I was. Like, not in the way that I am that person, but definitely in a way that I feel like I could have looked after her. It's very inner child-esque. I feel like I could have been there for her and like, oh my gosh, I know your needs. I wish I could go back in time and explain it to you.
But really getting connected with your core self and then nurturing your inner child, it seems like
Yeah,
that's helped you quite a bit.
absolutely.
Mm-hmm. What I'm really curious about is, you were talking about this being when you were about 14. So how long ago was that?
That was 11 years ago.
So 2012?
2012, yeah.
So was this the start of when all the different mental health diagnoses started being looked at more closely? Because we talked about how there are a number of different disorders that you have been diagnosed with. So was this like the starting point with the self-injury, or did those pieces start taking place before?
It was after this incident. So
Mm-hmm.
I was fully content with the idea that I could just self harm and no one would find out.
Right.
But it became less and less realistic. So when they did find out, it was immediate. Like, we're going to the psychiatrist, we're going to the doctor, you're going to see the counselor that's recommended by the doctor. And diagnoses were thrown at me that weren't fully accurate. Like, I think with any person diagnosed with BPD, there's a bit of it gets messy for a bit. Like, they misdiagnose you and they re-diagnose you and they put you on meds and all this stuff. So
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot that goes on, but that incident did prompt all that medical stuff with all the diagnosing and re-diagnosing and adjusting diagnosis and medication and the whole works.
yeah.
Okay. And so having gone through this journey and through the diagnoses and growing up and these recurring themes that were showing up for you, what else can you tell us about emotional pain you experienced?
For sure. It was like the first word that comes to mind is heavy. Like,
Right.
I felt so heavy yet so empty at the same time.
Right.
I just remember, like, I picture it as like just clawing for the chance to feel loved at that time. And
Mm-hmm.
I think when I was seeking out love, I was looking for codependence, which in
Mm-hmm.
turn would cause so much turbulence for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just kind of caught in this cycle of desperate to feel loved. I wanted people to hurt like I hurt when I was hurt. I wanted general gray. It's hard to describe a feeling like the one I was in, but very gray and cloudy, and I was dragging myself around.
Right.
Yeah.
You mentioned like you were clawing for the chance to feel loved, but you also talked about some of the things that you chose to do were maybe counterproductive. But it also sounds like when you talked about looking for codependence, you might have been at the time tying that to this is how I'm going to feel loved, and recognizing now that that wasn't actually helping me feel loved.
Yeah, no, it wasn't. It was counterproductive, right?
For you to not feel loved, what was the gap? What was not there? Do you remember? Can you recall?
Yeah, like I think it was attention from my family when they didn't really have the space to give it. It was like at school, I was kind of dealing with some difficult friendships, and I was picked on a little bit during that age.
Mm-hmm.
It was rare that I felt fully accepted
Mm-hmm.
for who I was.
Right. So you were really looking to feel accepted unconditionally, maybe. And
Mhm.
there were all these conditions wherever you were, with your family, at school, with friends.
Yeah.
And so it didn't feel like it was enough. Well,
Yeah.
it wasn't enough. And so
Yeah.
when you couldn't have it, is that how you got the idea of, well, if I can't feel love, then I'm going to look for love in this sort of way. And, if I have to hurt, then others going to hurt too. Is that kind of what you meant?
Sort of, yeah. Like I wanted to, like, there was a big part of me that was like, no one can ever find out about my self-harm. But there was also a part of me that knew that people pay attention. Like sometimes I had to do something dramatic to get eyes on me for a second.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like the panic of finding people to love me and prove it to me by hurting like I was is where, like, I'm like, oh my gosh, codependence. That's
Mm-hmm.
exactly
Mm-hmm.
where I would place that word.
So that's how codependence played a role in your life and what you equate codependence to. Like that's very clear now.
Yeah.
And yeah, and a part of you hoping like no one would find out, but knowing that I just have to say some trigger words or some things here and there, and I'll get people's attention at the same time.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't think that you were actually thinking about it in a cunning way, but unconsciously, like there's all this need and desire that you had, and you just didn't know how else to have it regulated. So you were just so desperate that it was whatever was showing up for you is what you were gravitating towards.
Totally. And my parents, their attention was on my siblings because they were struggling, right? So there might have been a subconscious connection in my head of like, if I do good, like I was getting good grades in school, and I was like, well, maybe if I,
I struggle too.
yeah, it totally wasn't intentional.
Or do you think it was like the only way I can be seen as or given attention to is if they see that I'm struggling too? Like not that I need to struggle to feel loved, but the only way I'm going to feel loved is if they can see him struggling.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you're right.
Right.
Yeah.
Uh, that's a really intense feeling to have, or like a really intense process for your whole mind and body to go through, to feel like however you're showing up is not enough to feel what you needed to feel in the
Yeah.
way that was good for you. You had to alter things. And of course, all subconsciously, unconsciously, maybe all of it is altered because you were just yearning for that and you didn't
Yeah.
know how else to get it.
Totally. Yeah, and I
Survival mode.
it was survival mode. Yeah, and like I'm not proud of it at all. Like looking back, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, that
I would hope that by now you wouldn't be harsh on yourself to say you're not proud of yourself because I don't think that you were doing it with intention. I think you were really just doing it out of need. And in hindsight, I think you can look back and say, hey, here are some of the things that I did that I know moving forward what would be better for me to do. But with all of the information you had, or what you, even with lots of information you didn't have, and being as young as you were and being exposed and witness to the family structure and what you had, I mean, I think you did the best you could. In a way, you really were struggling.
yeah."
There was a part of you, think about it, right? Being a young teenager, going through lots of hormonal changes, lots of things. You're the youngest of all your siblings. Your family's going through lots of mess, like a lot of things going on. Maybe you felt displaced for whatever reason, but what you needed, your needs were not being met.
Yeah, for sure. And I like what you said about like you're doing your best. And like I think that my family was too. Like we were all kind of obviously a bit new to
Yeah.
like the
You're
chaos.
working with what you know, right? And what you knew then is not all of the stuff that you know now. And I think you have to remember is that you can come from as loving as of a family as there is, which it seems like is true for you. But it doesn't mean that your experience of feeling unloved or not loved is something that should be taken lightly, because that is your true experience.
Thank you.
So it came from somewhere.
Yeah. Thank you.
Right?
Thank you.
Breathe. So I'm curious about compassion. Have you been able to cultivate some compassion for yourself in your life as you've grown up and moved through this over the last 11 years?
For sure. Yeah, like as time has gone by and as I've gone to therapy, especially DBT, kind of the idea behind DBT, from what I've learned in school anyway, is you like every emotion is valid. Everything that you're feeling is valid. So I just remember being young and angry and just hurt, and I like eventually I could kind of sit with myself and be like, "Oh, actually, you know what, these feelings were very real. Like it's not like I was faking it," which a lot of people with BPD I think tend to believe. Like it was raw and it was invasive, and holding self-compassion for myself with that,
Yeah,
it guided a lot of my recovery.
it sounds like it.
Yeah.
And I hope that you always hold on to that compassion for yourself, because it is truly a wonderful remedy.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, Allie, when people come to see me for therapy, individuals are typically in one of three places. Some people are getting started, they come and they know there's lots of stuff they need to sort through and work through, and they just lay it on me and go, "Hey, help me. Let's work on this." And there's some who are in the middle of something, and they're in the height of a storm, and they need some help to navigate and sort out and deal with the acute stressors, and then deal with other things and overall goals as well. And then there's people who are looking back. Sometimes they're trying to close chapters in their life, get some closure of some other kind, or maybe they're trying to make sense of things or learn some new skills for personal growth so that they can move forward. So if you were to choose one of these three places, what part of your journey would you say that you're in? Would you say that you're just getting started, in the middle, or looking back?
Definitely looking back. I'm in a bit of a chapter in my life where I'm working on apologizing to some people that I know I hurt when I wasn't able to articulate my needs, and definitely only specific people, because I think sometimes apologizing can be more harmful. Yeah, like I'm in a bit of a self-reflection era.
I like it, the self-reflection era. So what do you need to remind yourself to stay in this looking back self-reflection era that you call it?
One of the things that I try to always remember is that I continue to do the best that I can. I'm never going to know everything, right? Like I'm never going to be the most wise person ever. I'm still going to mess up and I'm still going to hurt people as I navigate these diagnoses. And so I try to just keep in mind that I'm doing what I can. Like I'm doing what I thought was best in the moment, and just trying to be easy on myself as time goes on.
Yeah. I really like your message, because it's really all about, how do I keep the focus on me and knowing that you are imperfect, and you do the best you can with the information you have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
It's a real true way of living. So is that what you would want to remember specifically about the process of your healing journey? Is just to remind yourself that, you're doing the best that you can, or is there something else that you'd also want to remember about the process of your healing journey?
It's definitely that, and I don't ever want to feel like I don't have room to grow, because no matter how many years of therapy, how many truths of life I discover, wisdom, or books I read, I'm always going to have something that I can work on and improve, because I have people in my life who interact with me when I'm not well, and the recovery isn't linear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's also a very humble reminder.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all about that reminder of, hey, we're humans, right? So we're not going to know everything. To tell yourself, I am human. To be human means to err, not in a complacent way, but I might make a mistake. I might not know everything. I'm not going to be the wisest, but I'm going to do my best. I'm going to learn as much as I can. I'm going to reflect as much as I can. And I'm going to be and continue being, knowing that there'll always be a little more that I can be exposed to, and I'm willing to go there. So it's a really beautiful message.
Thank you.
That you're giving yourself. Yeah. All right. So, Allie.
Yes.
We have talked about quite a bit of your journey, understanding this incident that sort of opened up and prompted so many different things in your life in the mental health realm, and how things have taken its shape and form. Like, you've already been sharing about emotions you experienced and things that were going on, but tell us a little bit more, if you can, about how your untold story has affected your mental health. What else can you share?
Yeah, I think something that I've needed to really kind of drill into my head recovery wise was the difference between shame and guilt. And sometimes I think that you can become too self aware.
Right.
Like my last therapist, she was a DBT therapist. She straight up said to me that, like, your homework this week is to stop thinking so much about your thoughts.
Right. Right.
So I think that's probably one of the bigger threats to my mental health. But I will say, like, I'm always happy to know that nothing that can happen right now is, like, in terms of mental health journey, is completely new. Like, I'm always able to hold empathy for myself and kind of navigate based on something that's happened in the past.
Yeah. So you don't have to know everything, but you're equipped.
Yeah.
You're equipped to handle new.
Totally. Yeah.
So can we go back to when you said that, recovery wise, something that was really integral and important for you was to learn the difference between shame and guilt. Can you share your learnings with us? I mean, I have a lot of thoughts of my own, but I'm really curious about yours and how it all came to be. So you learned the difference between shame and guilt. Do tell.
Yeah. So I learned in my last, like, big wave of therapy. When I say that, I mean, like, I take breaks from therapy and then I have to go back after like something happens. My therapist and I discovered that one of my most invasive emotions that I struggled with was shame. And so she starts saying, like, oh, shame this and guilt that, and I was like, what's the difference? Like, I don't understand. And she said, well, shame is something that when we were cavemen, shame is something that we needed to survive. It was something that kept us alive, because if you betray your tribe in any way, it could literally mean life or death. So it's shame is I am bad. It's the I am. It's kind of this whole commentary about who you are as a person. But guilt is I did something bad. It's that understanding that what you do does not define you as a person, and it's simply something that can be remedied, or you can apologize for and do a repair if need be. We did a lot of shame work, and a lot of it was around the type of stuff that I'm talking about today with you, the sort of manipulative behaviors, hurting people around me when I was not well. And by the end of it, I had therapy homework one week to bake myself a cake.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote on it, I conquered shame. I thought that was very lovely.
Oh, great. You had a cake that said that I conquered shame?
Yeah, and I just doused it in sprinkles. It was like the most messy cake you've ever seen.
Oh my goodness. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
That is amazing. So you had to bake it yourself, like outside of therapy.
I baked it and then I shared it with some of my counseling friends from school.
Nice. Okay, so look at you following through on homework.
Oh, yeah.
So what was it like for you to work through shame when you could work through it, understand the difference because you've articulated it. I couldn't articulate it any clearer than how you have, being in the field and, dealing with these sorts of emotions on a regular basis. Your way of explaining it is very hardcore and clear. Like it's so easy to understand. So once you can identify, know the difference between guilt and the difference between shame and understand when you were experiencing something that made you feel guilty versus when you were experiencing something that influenced the feelings of shame to come about. And yes, you actively worked through it. So what did it look like when you did work through it?
So we did emotional exposure therapy, is that's what my therapist called it.
Mm-hmm.
The idea behind it was to make me not so terrified to feel these feelings. This was in 2020 when I started doing emotional exposure therapy. I started hallucinating. Um,
Okay.
yeah, and my therapist was like, "Hey, the reason why you're doing this is because you're not feeling your feelings, and this is your brain's way of saying, hey,
Yeah.
we got something for you." So that's why we started doing it, and shame was one of the emotions that we would do exposure with, and it basically looked like she would encourage me to trigger certain emotions in myself, whether that be sadness by watching a sad video or a sad movie, happiness by looking at photos of dogs, stuff like that, and to let the emotion come and go. We also did it with anger, which
Mm-hmm.
was actually really funny. The way she did it was kind of interesting. She said, I want you to sit in your anger, sit in a negative emotion for 2 whole minutes. Just sit in that emotion.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was like,
I bet it
okay.
was a long 2 minutes for you.
It was. Well, I went to work and I was angry. Something happened and I was angry. And I was like, okay, this is my chance. I'm gonna sit in this and I'm just gonna sit here fuming for several minutes. But I couldn't keep the emotion with me for that long.
You were so used to like leaving your emotions aside, huh?
Totally. And I,
Mhm.
I came back to her and I said, hey, I really tried, but I couldn't sit with the emotion for that long. And she said, that's exactly what I needed you to learn. It all passes eventually. You know,
Right.
you can sit with it and you can try to keep it with you, but eventually your nervous system needs to rest. Emotions are just something that you greet.
Hmm.
And then, yeah, that was before we started doing a deeper dive into shame and exactly where it comes from.
And so, how do you know that shame has lifted from you? What's different?
I feel more compassion and empathy toward myself.
Mm.
When shame is lifted, I can accept myself in my sickest moments. You know, I like earlier in this podcast when we were talking, I was telling that story and I was kind of getting uncomfortable and being like, "Oh, I'm
Hmm.
not proud of this." I
Sure.
know that shame is lifting when I can be like, okay, these emotions were valid. And you got actually kind of a live, a live perspective on what that looks like, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you for sharing that. That is so abundantly clear as to how your mental health was impacted and all the nitty gritties of what was happening on the internal side. And just for your authenticity and just going right in and sharing all the things that you just shared. So, Allie, I would like to know what is your key message to the listeners of our show? What do you want them to know?
Ooh, I would say doing bad things does not make you a bad person. It just gives you room to heal a bit more. I think that's like a good simple message.
Say it again. I'm trying to take it in.
Doing bad things does not make you a bad person. It gives you room to work on healing.
I love it. It's such an important message. And do you have any other messages that you think is important for the audience to hear?
Be kind to yourself. It kind of piggybacks off of that message, but be kind to yourself. Don't beat yourself up too much. Don't rush yourself to make amends before you've fully processed what happened. And yeah, just take your time in recovery. I think hurt people. We all do some unsavory things when we're struggling, but the key is to learn about it.
Right. Yeah, unsavory things happen, right? That's part of being human. Do you stay in it, or what do you do to work through it, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, so I'm curious then about what is your game changer inspiration that's close to you that reflects your untold story? So is there something during the height of everything that you were going through that really helped you pivot? Like, is there an inspirational quote or a book or a speaker or a person or an event or something that really spoke to you?
Yeah, I think about my family. I wasn't the only person at this time going through recovery like headfirst. I think watching my parents like really sit down and feel those feelings and cry and talk it out was super inspiring. Watching, yeah, my brother's going through recovery, my sister working on her self-awareness too. It was like, oh my gosh, like my family is so cool. Yeah, so I think that was like the most inspiring part about my journey. The pivot of my family going through therapy together was a big one.
So when that happened, that was the pivot.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Right. Because it wasn't quite like that all the time. But when the pivot happened in the family, it really became your anchor.
Yeah, I'd say it switched my mindset from I'm never going to get better and just accepting that to a recovery mindset, solution oriented approach.
Right. From never going to get better to like the solution. How do we make this better? What can I change? Like you're just taking control in a healthy way.
Absolutely. I'm watching my genetics
Yeah.
do it, so why can't I?
I like it. Okay. What is a cause or an organization that has been impactful to you on your journey that you would like to give a shout out to?
I would love to give a shout out to Inner Solutions. They were my DBT therapy place. They saved my life so many times. They do phone coaching and one-on-one sessions and group therapy. They were the ones who put a blanket on me and gave me a hot chocolate.
Right.
Yeah.
A blanket and a hot chocolate can do wonders.
Absolutely.
Especially when you're in a setting like that with so much support.
Totally. Just gentle lighting.
Right.
Good people.
Okay. Well, shout out to Inner Solutions then. All right. So, Allie, how can people connect with you if they would like to? How are you findable?
I do most of my advocacy on TikTok.
Okay.
And I'm on Instagram. And I'm reachable on both platforms. You can message me.
Amazing. All right. So we'll just make sure all of that information is in our show notes page. And guess what, Allie?
What?
You've just dared yourself to share. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you did it. Allie, I would just like to take a moment to express my gratitude for the story that you've shared today about living with mental illness, the incident in the living room, everything that prompted for it to become an open discussion with your family and have everything be out in the open, your emotional literacy and speaking about how you raised your self-awareness through your entire journey so far. I'm truly grateful to have been able to hear and witness your story today, for real. So thank you for the deep conversation and for all the daring and sharing.
Thank you so much, Salima, for the opportunity.
Wonderful. Once again, Allie, thank you for being part of Dare to Share Your Untold Story and helping to be a voice in breaking down the barriers of mental stigma. To all of our listeners, if you like what you've been hearing on this podcast and you want to be part of breaking down barriers of mental stigma, I invite you to go wherever you are listening to the episode and hit subscribe. Leave us a comment or a review of the episode and maybe how you relate to it. To learn more about what we offer, visit www.daretoheal.co. And if you are feeling ready and brave to share, please submit your story by visiting www.daretoshare.co. Thanks for joining in.